Welcome to the EarthWorks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. This is Joel Simmons, and this is another EarthWorks Podcast. I'm not sure what number we are, but we're very close to 250 over the last 5 years, which is pretty impressive, I think. And we are going to stay in-house today. I am talking with my dear friend and agronomist, Kevin Hicks. And we want to talk a little bit about, we're kind of now just at the very beginning of the season. We're recording this the first week in March. And we are finally, I'm comfortable to say, through with all the trade shows. My last trade show of every year seems to be the New England show, which is a wonderful show. And we get to spend some time with our partners at Tom Irwin, and they put on the best trade show gig of all. We had a Bloody Mary brunch and a little jazz thing during the show, and hundreds of people in there, and it was just wonderful. It's always a great show. I mean, a lot of these shows have kind of come and gone over the years. I know Ohio is not what it was many years ago, but New England and the Carolina shows are still two of the best regional shows that we attend, and the New England show always represents for me kind of a chance to breathe again. But usually what it means is when I breathe like that at the end of that long run, I get sick.
You're sick.
Of course,
yeah.
I got sick. So I spent a couple of weeks down and out, and it's been a tough winter from my health standpoint between all the stuff that we're going through. But let's talk a little bit about, you and I have been to a couple things together. Certainly we went to Acres and we've talked about that. We certainly spent time at the GIS and saw a lot of people and had a great time, and it's always fun. I tell this. I think I've told this story before, but I hope I won't embarrass you. But one of our highlights of going to the GIS was always running into Kevin Hicks, and he would always say, "Hey, this is the year he's going to let me go this year," and I would always say,
Right.
"Call me first." And and how long ago was that now? How many years have you been here?
7.5.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Yeah, it was Labor Day. It was Labor Day Saturday, I think you called me. I was in the gym on the treadmill doing my due diligence, and I looked down and I have a note from you saying I'm a free agent. So I got off the thing and ran out so I wouldn't disturb my fellow workout mates, and went out and called you, and we talked for an hour, and I said, "You're going to get 6 offers before I can get your ass into to Easton, Pennsylvania, and just hold off until you do." And we're grateful that it all worked well. I mean, I lean on you a lot because you've got 25 years as a superintendent in how many states? 5 states did you work? Count Minnesota?
Minnesota, Colorado, Arizona, and 2 in Boise. So just 4. But 2 different climates in Boise completely.
Well, Boise and then Coeur d'Alene.
Or in Idaho, I meant.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot. My geography is missing. It's still Idaho.
Yeah,
but
people don't realize how arid and hot the Boise Valley can. In fact, all of southern Idaho. I mean, we had the year I moved there, which was 1998 or 9. We had more days over 100 there in the summer than my previous golf course did in Scottsdale. So
Really?
it's really unexpected, and they record very, very typically less than 10 inches of precipitation annually. So It's very dry and very hot. And yet you do get the seasonal changes in winter and summer. So it's kind of the perfect climate, which is probably why millions and millions and millions of people see
That's why everybody and their bloody and their kids are all moving there, and nobody can afford to live there anymore.
Yeah. In my travels, it seems like it feels a lot like Northern and Central California, which is probably why a lot of people from Northern and Central California are moving that direction. It feels a lot like Sacramento, in regards to weather and the mountains and so forth.
How many golf courses are in Boise?
Not many.
No, I didn't think so.
Yeah, probably 25 or 30 if I were to guess. That's just a pot shot, though. I have no idea.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, it's not a big market. But
No.
Are there golf courses coming in with all the people coming in? Or are they talking
Not
about
a lot. Not a lot. And I don't know why. I mean, there've been a few that have come online. There's been a lot of renovation work, which we've seen throughout the country, but there's been a lot of work done and planned in the next couple of years.
Yeah, we're actually seeing a lot of renovation work
Yeah.
across the country, and
Yep.
still some construction. I mean, we're seeing construction through, Texas and certainly Florida,
Florida. Yeah.
and a lot of places. So which is really good. I mean, we love construction because it really gives us a chance to, that it's that Dave Wilbur thing. You got one shot at doing it right.
Yep.
What was we coined his
You got
phrase.
six weeks to do what it'll take 10 years to do
There you go.
naturally.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so and I've been talking a lot about that recently, and talking about using Renovate, using Ecolite, and rotodaring it down, and a lot of
Yeah.
people kind of look at me a little crazy, but the reverse tine tiller is really the best way to get those kind of amendments in there. I think I've told this story before, but I remember many years ago I was actually at Robert Trent Jones with a whole bunch of folks, and they were looking at building, I think they were talking about building Kinloch. But there was a
Mm.
discussion as to whether or not we use peat moss and the amendments, or do we how much peat moss? And I think the trend has really started to go toward, and I think rightfully so, much lower amounts of peat moss. I mean, I'm still an advocate of peat moss for, if nothing else, for some insurance.
Yeah.
But you've probably seen this, and I've seen this, and I bet a lot of superintendents listening have seen this. When you dig up a golf course green, a sand green that had 20% peat moss, you see this migration of the peat moss, and you get these big soft balls of peat moss in pockets. And again, it's kind of interesting. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is some of the things that I've been going through in the academies this year is questions about what are the raw materials of carbon, and one
Yeah.
of them is peat moss, and as a
Right.
fertilizer amendment. But unfortunately, peat moss is really certainly in my mind, it's not a very good carbon source for microbes, and it's not available carbon. It's
Yeah.
the analogy that I use in the academy is it's like you and me chewing on a pencil. It's very lignous,
Pretty
and
good for holding moisture
it's
in the
very good
short
for
term.
holding moisture.
And I think the thing about those clods, whether they're little marble size or you'll see those little peat balls, if you will. And the other thing that I think most people notice is they're not terribly broken down,
No, that's the
even
point,
after
right?
years.
Yeah.
So, I in that comparison between all the products that we compete against, I use that that phrase. I think, I don't know if I made it up or somebody else did, but it definitely takes energy to make energy.
Yeah.
And so
No.
you've got to go through that breakdown process in order to get that stuff to degrade and become, a useful part of the humus fraction, I guess.
Yeah, and that it's funny because you've done a whole bunch of talks this winter. I don't know if you're at the end of it yet or not. I still have a handful of academies to do between now and probably the end of April. But
Yeah.
I've probably done 15, maybe 20 academies of a couple hours long, all across the country. And it seems like everywhere this year I go, I get a lot of questions about what are these carbon sources.
Right.
And I now say this at pretty much every academy, and if anybody's listening that's been to a recent academy, you'll recognize this. But I'll always ask, I'll always make the statement. I really don't think there's probably a superintendent, and I did one in Iowa a couple of weeks ago where we had over 100 people, and I said to them, mostly superintendents, golf course superintendents. I said, I don't think there's probably a superintendent in the country these days, or at least I would like to find one that doesn't have something in their shop that doesn't have some kind of a carbon amendment to it.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Andersons are putting in humates, carbon. There's not a liquid fertilizer company now that doesn't have a molasses, a fish, a kelp, a humate in one or more of their products. And what I overwhelmingly kind of gathered by the conversations we were having at the academies is that guys really still aren't completely sure as to what are these carbon sources, what's the really goal, and obviously what we're trying to accomplish and doing our academy is explaining the why of carbon-based fertilizer. But
Yeah, and what the different sources bring to the table, because
Right.
they all bring different qualities and benefits to the table.
And it's funny because it's got to be incredibly frustrating for any superintendent that really doesn't study this the way you and I do, because there's so much coming at them. There's so
Yeah.
much crap coming at them. It reminds me of when Lawrence Mayhew started the HPTA, the Humic Products Trade Association, which was designed specifically to discuss whether or not the humates that some manufacturer is talking about is actually a humate. The original snake oil. I mean, this was back in
Right.
when Jerry Brunetti and I started this little journey. Humic acids were nothing but snake oil. I tell this story often, but I remember very early on, Jerry and I were at a meeting. There was a professor that came in and said, "Well, I don't know what this Leonardite stuff, Leonardite, named after Dr. Leonard, but I talked to a friend of mine. He said it's coal dust, and I don't know what you want to have coal dust for." So that was kind of what folks were thinking, and that was just all snake oil. And Lawrence, I think, has said this on our podcast a couple of times. There were so many people that were coming out with snake oils that claiming they were humic acid. So that's why this group of scientists started the HPTA, which we're proud members of, and all of our products are tested and are in fact humates. But there's a lot of companies out there that I'm sure are not using humates or exaggerating. I mean, you see products that say, "Oh, we have 85% humate." Well, no, I don't think that's possible.
Right. I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite is the ones that say, our humates are derived from humus, and basically
Uh-huh.
there is no humic acid in humus. So yeah, I can see, how confusing this must be. And you talk to superintendents all the time. I mean, I can't imagine. And you were there at one point when this was all coming. You were kind of ahead of the curve because you got the whole soil biology piece. But how frustrating must this be?
Well, it is, and it's I think the difficulty is it's been interesting in the last year or two to see, and I'll lump myself into this category, but to see the real mad scientists, the guys that like to build their own sprays and do
Yeah.
their own thing, and when I have a good conversation with them, we start talking about how we put some of our products together, and they're like, "Huh, I'm doing 6 or 8 of those things at best, and it's taken my spray tech X amount of hours to
Yeah.
build
Yeah.
this
Two
product.
hours to fill
Maybe
the
I should
tank.
just use yours, and
Yeah.
and it's kind of like that analogy. I'm getting a little off track here, but it's kind of like that conversation I had when I first started with EarthWorks. I expected more of the highly educated, the high budget dollar courses to
Yeah.
really kind of adopt what we were talking about. And it gained more traction and quicker traction in a relatively new market of mine, with the guys that didn't have a spray tech because it was simplicity
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
complete a complete program. So it's been interesting, but yeah, it's a daunting task because the claims are the claims, and it's something when you were talking, I've been thinking about, and I haven't introduced this in any of my talks, but humic substances have been around and utilized in other industries for a long, long
For
time,
yeah, decades and decades.
specifically mining and drilling.
Yeah.
And the reason, and I kind of nerded out one night and got into that whole process and how it's utilized. And I'm thinking there's no difference between what the drilling industry is trying to get out of that product and really what we're trying to get
Yeah.
out of it, except that we're in the process, we're trying to house biology, but it breaks up, it breaks things up in the soil and
My favorite
really
word,
helps
flocculation.
flocculation. Exactly.
Yeah.
So humics are not new,
Explain that.
but
What they're doing is they're pouring humic acid into the drill in front of the drill
they're
bit.
running it with the fluid. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
To
it's
open up the hole a
flocculating
little
that.
bit easier so it's
Yep.
less damaging to the drill bits.
Yeah,
And
and it was a real eye opener for me to realize,
yeah.
gosh, it's kind of what we're doing on a small scale,
Yeah.
trying to change soil physics or soil properties.
It's funny you say that because I heard that story very early on when I was very, very green, and I wasn't really sure I fully understood that. Obviously now it's but very relevant
Right.
now, but what you just said is exactly right. We're doing exactly the same thing. We're trying to release the soil, flocculated. Obviously, we spend a lot of time with chemistry and trying to change, physics with that, which we still get
Yeah.
criticized from many of our dear friends in the business who shall remain nameless. But but it was interesting, 25 years ago, and we would hear those stories and really, didn't really understand it all. And
Yeah.
even back then, I didn't understand the whole humate, controversy. And obviously, when Lawrence built the HPTA, it really brought it to fruition. But there's a lot of people that are coming out with, humic acid claims. I mean, and again, I don't mean to be critical of a synthetic fertilizer company that uses humates, but one thing I got to say is that remember that a humic acid is not a food source for microorganisms. So
Right.
I think it's a wonderful trend. I think it's wonderful that some of the big fertilizer companies are coming out using humic acids, and all the a lot of other people. I mean, we've used them literally from day one. But it's important, and that's what I'm trying to really focus on this year in the soils classes and the academies, is to really help people understand what all this stuff is. And try to figure out where they go. When we got into the business, this is in the late 80s. There were very few of us doing. I mean, Emerald Eye was out there selling kelp meal, which we love. And
Yep.
the Roots Company was out there selling humic acids, which we love. And, I remember, Jerry kind of getting into, he wasn't, he didn't know the whole T&O industry. But he saw these two companies at trade shows and goes, these guys are using humic acids, these guys are using kelp meal. And really what he wanted to do was bring these all together in one dynamic formula. I mean, we've said this many times. He was adamant about avoiding linear formulations.
Right.
And
Right.
and if you listened to the Laura Decker conversation that I had a few weeks ago from the soil biome meter folks, she was really talking about how these linear things like molasses or whatever, it could be anything, are only going to feed a narrow population of
Yep.
microbiology. In a
Yep.
soil that has, a billion microbes, it's feeding a smaller sector of that. Whereas when you bring all these things to the table together, like we've done,
Mhm.
you're feeding a very broad spectrum. It still blows my mind after 37 years of doing this that we only know to this, and Lawrence and I argue about this, but we only know 2%, maybe 5% of the soil biome. We
Yeah, he
only
thinks
know.
less.
He says, yeah, he fights with me on that. I try to be
Right.
optimistic.
Right.
And I mean, having been mentored by Jerry was, voracious in his reading and would always find new things and studies that talk about, new things. I remember when we started working with Elaine Ingham and the Soil Food Web, that was a huge breakthrough in the ability to identify and understand what the soil biome really looked like. I mean, we really started to understand the relationship between bacteria and fungi, even actinomycetes. And she was really, she really opened a lot of people's eyes on that. But we still don't know. We don't know shit. As no pun
Right.
intended.
Right. Well, you think about the life cycles of a
Yeah,
lot of these bacteria. It's minutes, 20, 30 minutes, and
yeah,
their whole life is there and gone. And
yeah.
and so
Boom.
so to have that kind of variety is totally believable.
And that's a good, I've been bringing that up a lot too. And I think that's an important point is that a lot of, one of the things that Elaine told us was that in turf, which botanically is, a lower rung on the ladder. I mean, it's
Yep.
not a pine tree. It's not an
From a
apple tree.
complexity
Right. I mean,
standpoint.
botanically,
Yeah.
it's not all that complex. The predominant species is bacteria. I mean, it's
Right.
very bacterial heavy. And like you just said, and I've been saying this a lot in academies this year, for us to be able to make sure that that 20-minute bacteria can actually do something, it has to have available carbon sources, and that's really
Mhm.
what I think you're seeing the industry go to. I'll pat ourselves on the back, and I think we've kind of led this in a lot of ways. But it's important to understand that if that 20-minute bacteria doesn't have food sources that are available. I mean, yes, there's plenty of carbon, as academia loves to tell, in the soil, but unfortunately, much of that carbon is lignous, thatchy,
Yeah.
undigestible. That 20-minute bacteria is not getting it.
And it also needs to have a hospitable place to live, and sands that we deal with in sports turf and golf are not hospitable
Yeah.
environments in which to live and thrive.
And one
So
of the most
that's
important things that Laura Decker talked about is they need moisture. So
yeah,
if there isn't
yeah,
moisture in that soil, and this kind of leads to a lot of conversations, and we're bouncing around here, but I think it's interesting. Let me throw this at you because as a superintendent, you were probably exposed to this a lot, and it still really kind of bugs me. Our industry is so in love with the fact that organic matter in the soil profile is always bad.
right.
I mean, has that always been the case? I mean, were you always taught that as a superintendent that
I
organic is bad?
I
You got to
think
get
to
it
a certain
additive?
degree, I mean, I can remember when I first got into the business and started paying attention. It was probably early mid 80s. And in the Midwest where I grew up, most of the top dressing mixes were a 70-30 or a 70-20-10 where they were using some sort of a suitable topsoil in addition to
Wow.
peat
In the
and
top
what have
dressing.
you. So I and I think at the same time when I first came out of college and we were doing things in Arizona maybe a little bit differently than a lot of places, but we were constantly remineralizing with organics.
Yeah.
Anytime we opened up a hole, we were trying to get something to fill that just to get some sustenance there. So I don't think it's always been that way, but I think it's kind of our desire to manipulate and control the environment that we work in that's caused that. But look at the other side of the coin, though. We've probably cut our just nitrogen inputs in the time I've been in the industry, 30 some years,
Yeah.
by 70%.
Yeah.
I mean,
You
it
think
was
it's that
not,
high? Do you?
I don't think it was uncommon to see golf courses that were putting 6 to 8 to 9, maybe 10 pounds of N
Oh, I
on
remember
greens.
10 pounds.
So where do you think all that organic came from? And now we by our lack of understanding or mismanagement, we created a whole industry in controlling organic material. Well,
Right.
we did it to ourselves,
Yeah. Well, most of
right?
our problems we created.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know that that's always been as much on the forefront as
Yeah.
it is now. But I also think that now we've maybe taken it a little too far, and we're trying to manage everything on the razor's edge and
Yeah.
making, if there's one thing that we can take away from a turf manager's list of challenges, why wouldn't we talk about that?
Yeah, it's very frustrating to me because obviously my passion and my interest in this is all about soil biology, and we know that
Yeah,
biology will digest that. But you've seen the picture that I show, and it's a picture of a really humified profile from a green, sand green. And
yeah,
I put that slide up at every class I talk in front of golf course superintendents, and
yeah,
I ask the question hopefully without trying to embarrass anybody, but just to kind of get them to think. Is this, if you inherited this, if I hired you for this job on this property and this is what you saw the first day, would you be happy? Would you, run out to the shop and grab the grating and start ripping the daylights out of this?
hmm
And most guys shake their head and
would,
say, yeah, I mean, that doesn't look good to me. But when
yeah,
you look at it, you can see the profile has, it's very consistent. And then at the very bottom of the profile, you see all the sand below the humus. You
yep,
see massive roots. So air is moving through there and water is moving through there. So there really is a difference. And I tell this story often where we've had clients that invested in their humification of their greens, especially sand, and they built a nice profile of humus, which allowed them to stop running around at 2 o'clock pulling hoses like their
yeah,
heads are chopped off because there's actually moisture being managed, not wet, but being managed. And then the other thing that always comes out, the question I always get when I have that, and it's probably, the picture I have is probably 3 or 4
several
inches
inches.
deep.
Yeah,
The first question I get, and what this is going to be, is what's the playability of that?
hmm
Which is a great question. I mean, I think any
right.
any good intuitive superintendent and superintendents are incredibly intuitive, which I think is probably the greatest gift that our industry has. But they ask, is this playable? Or when a shot comes in from 95 yards with a
Yeah,
pitching wedge, is it going to just go splat? And the answer is it is incredibly firm because it's not layered and it's not being held wet. It's
Yeah.
there's moisture in humus, but it's never wet. The water will move, the majority of the water will move through, but that organic profile will maintain consistency of moisture. So it really is what we're, really all about is trying to build that humification, right?
Yeah, and we have tools now that can prove that it's
Yeah.
not affecting playability in a negative way. It's easy to measure.
Yeah, I mean and I that's a good point. And it's funny because there's so many good tools in the industry now, but
Right.
the thing that, one of the things that's kind of new that bugs me is, well, let's layer, let's take the soil test in layers. And then of
Yeah.
course, and ISTRIC does this, and I love the ISTRIC test. I recommend it on a regular basis, but the one thing that drives me nuts is that they always say, "Oh, too much organic matter in the top
Yeah.
end." Well, of course there is. That's where all the
It,
roots are.
it's a little like sending a
Yeah,
sample to a pathologist. I just had this conversation yesterday. Nothing, pathologists are essential in the turf industry, but
absolutely.
they'll also find something almost every time. And it was a superintendent in the Midwest that had dealt with an issue that is very infrequently observed, but it came back from the lab as something totally different. But going back to your point, with all the tools we have, the one thing, and we talk quite a bit about this internally, the one thing we don't have is a really good tool to measure the level of degradation of
Right.
organic matter or
Humification.
humus. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
exactly. I
and
mean, the
we
best,
don't have a good answer.
what the best tool is for that? This.
Right,
Just run it through
right.
your fingers, and humus will crumble.
Yeah,
Thatch is lignous and stemmy, and you can feel it when you pull a plug. You can feel it at the top. You
right.
can, I always when I pull a probe out of a green, the first thing I'm gonna do is smell it because I want to make sure it's not anaerobic. But I'll pull that plug and I'll feel that
Yep,
first inch, and you can feel, and you can kind of get a good feel as to is it humified, is it thatchy, and or is it loaded with bicarbonates because that will also make it kind of crunchy. So
right.
simple. I mean that go back to old school, man. I mean you got two fingers,
Yeah,
and that's probably the best way to identify is it good organic matter and or is it bad. And that's the question I wish we could really ask, and that's the question I think I wish some of these physical labs would ask is, okay, there's organic matter there, but can we qualify it? Is it good organic matter or
yep,
is it not good? I mean, thatch is not good organic matter. You've seen my thatch cake picture. It's, a
yep.
guy put out a pound of urea and then he top dressed and he put out a pound and there's 6 layers in a profile of organic matter, thatch and sand, and none of them have broken, open.
Well,
And it
and
just
again, going back a generation, that was in Minnesota, that's the way we top dressed. We do it once heavy in the springtime after aerification and once heavy in the fall after aerification. And then we rode the whole summer without a
yeah.
top dress. And we did some cultivation, but that's where that as you're pounding
Right.
all the nitrogen, that's where all that buildup in that thatch cake
Yeah,
comes from.
exactly. You were back there, building a lot of nitrogen, so there was a lot of thatch being developed. I
Yeah,
mean, again, understand that the best way to build thatch is to overuse synthetic fertilizer. There, it's
right.
an imbalance of carbon to nitrogen. There's not enough carbon energy in the soil to keep microbes active, and it's the microbes ultimately that are digesting that material. The other question that I still get, and we get for years is, why would you want to put down anything organic when you're trying to get rid of organic?
Right.
And first of all, again, it goes back to, is it good organic matter or not? Do you
Yeah.
need to get rid of organic matter? But the answer is pretty simple. I mean, what we're doing is providing very available forms of carbon, and that's going to stimulate the microbial activity, which is going to digest. Once they're finished with the food that we give them, they're all jagged up and they're off to work,
Yeah.
and now they're chomping on the thatch and kind of bringing that down. Let's talk a little bit. There's a whole bunch of things we can talk about. We're going to run out of time before we finish, which is
Of
typical
course.
when you and I get together and talk.
Yeah.
But talk about anything that you saw either at the GIS or anywhere else this year that sounds like it's the forefront. I mean, you always have an eye on this. You keep an eye on it, on the social media platforms, and
Yeah.
obviously we talk about it, on
Well,
our talks.
so I'll go back to GIS in a minute, but the one thing I noticed, to the earlier conversation, and I sent a note to all you guys on the team.
Yeah.
I was at the Idaho chapter meeting, and we had a trade show, and there were 26 tabletop participants in the trade show, 6 of which were some kind of an organic fertilizer source, including ours. I've never seen that number for that small a group. That was pretty.
Yeah.
So it was pretty impressive. But
the world is changing, my friend. We're never
you
turning back.
You could be threatened by it, or you could say, you know what, this is where we're headed, and it's a little competition is going to make us all better. So that was one thing I've seen this spring. I didn't get around the whole show floor, unfortunately, and I've already said we're going to set shift times so we can get out and walk around. But man, if you're not thinking automation at this point, I think there's no reason to go to that show anymore. It's pretty incredible how so many companies, big and small, are coming into the market with robotics and with autonomous machines. I'm still going to try to get the guys on from Firefly, but man, some of this stuff, and it's kind of come from ancillary industries and not so much the long-standing companies that have served our industry, but maybe some that have come out of other industries. They're really innovating at a fast pace. Firefly Automatics is one that I've seen in person, and the ROI is, I think it's there. And the cool
explain
thing,
it a little bit so people that may not know what it is.
So Firefly, it's a U.S. based company out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and they have come out of the sod production industry, so harvesters, mowers. And to me, that was one of the first keys. We had Cub Cadet in the market for quite a while, and they were trying to scale a small single cutting unit greens mower to larger acreage. These guys are like, hold my beer. I've got 500 acres that we're mowing autonomously now. I can do your silly little fairways in no time. So they actually scaled the other way and went to a 5-gang unit.
5 gangs autonomous.
Yeah, so it's a fairway mower. It's a fairway cutting unit, and what really struck me about that was that it's almost like a Tesla. The hardware is there. It's any changes or improvements or upgrades they make are all software upgrades. So it can be done via the internet, and away we go. Engineering was really solid, and I'm not taking anything away from the other big manufacturers,
or promoting these folks, but it's just.
Oh, I'll promote them because I think they're
well,
doing
that's
a good job.
That's fair. That's all right.
And they can produce on a fairly quick basis, which has been a criticism of some of the other companies right now. But
where are they based out of? What do you know? Where?
Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake. Oh, you said that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. But, it was interesting to watch a group of superintendents kind of reason through the cost, because there's a significant cost, and we've talked about this, but there's also a savings in not necessarily having an operator on that thing for 5 hours. The life expectancy of the machine is far beyond what traditional manufacturers can claim with internal combustion engines.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. So they actually have a longer life?
Well, that was my first question.
Because there's
not
as
battery
much
life.
It's going. I mean, it's just the battery that would have to be replaced.
Yeah. So the battery life, they claim a 5,000 charge cycle lifetime. So that's, in my climate, we mow maybe 100 times a season. So that's 50 years of life.
On one battery.
On one battery pack. So that's pretty impressive. But the first adopters in my area, in my immediate area, was a municipal course over in the Spokane area. They bought 2 of them, so they dropped well over $300,000 on 2 of them because they saw at not union but at city scale wages, they could pay that thing back pretty quickly compared to $110,000 traditional mowing machine, cutting machine.
And they can't find people anyway. So, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Tell the story. I mean, you've told this story to me, but you were in that meeting and you said half the room was like, on, and the other half was like not.
Yeah.
I mean, explain that.
Well,
that's fascinating.
Kind of like we were talking about a liquid program. I would have expected, because there were a dozen superintendents and a couple of, allied people like myself. And when the sales rep told us how much the units were going for, it was like Moses splitting the Red Sea. I mean, six guys went this way and said, "Oh, I'll never pay for that. That's way too expensive." And the other six guys said, "Oh, well, now hold on a minute." And it wasn't differentiated by high budget, low budget guys.
No, I
It
bet
was
not.
there were
Well, if
more
the
low budget
local
guys.
municipality is buying two of
Yeah,
them.
there were more low budget golf courses or lower budget golf courses that are like, now hold on a minute. I'm paying city scale wages at $22, $24 an hour. Um, I'm seeing this pencil out pretty quickly. So it was really kind of an interesting conversation to
Yeah.
have, but supply chain is still an issue, and these guys are saying, "Hey, you place an order, I can get it to you in 3-4 weeks."
That's impressive. I mean, you
Yeah,
can't do that with with regular mowers.
yeah, the,
I don't know if you had a conversation with that municipality, but when a superintendent from a municipality goes and promote or asks the powers to be for that kind of capital, I mean, I'd be curious. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. I mean,
yeah,
it would have to be somebody that kind of gets the ROI value in the in the management of that team.
yeah.
But I can also imagine a lot of superintendents going, "Hey, this could really save us a lot of energy, a lot of money." The ROI, you'd have to have one hell of a great presentation with an ROI value on it to really sell
I
that, I would think.
I don't know that you would. I mean, look how many municipalities and communities are looking to make a move towards the green movement. Look how many,
Yeah, good.
and the other thing I think that had to have played into it is they have to submit competitive bids. Well, there's nobody else in that market right now.
Oh,
So
that's
there's
interesting. Yeah,
there's
true.
no competitor. Could be a lot of things at play, but I was really surprised until I thought about who it was because he was at
Yeah.
that meeting. I thought, I don't know that it was as big a sales pitch as you might think in that regard because it's something you can splash on the website and in the newspaper and say, look what we're doing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a pretty good PR move.
So if they get autonomous fairway mowers, what's going to happen to all the retired superintendents and lawyers that want to
Yeah,
retire and just mow fairways and play golf?
it
You know,
it's I think early adopters are one thing, but I think the general masses it's going to be a while because there's in any new technology
yeah.
there's guys that see it right away. But the other thing that I don't I don't let superintendents really make this argument if they're talking to me because I don't think it's valid. But you hear a lot of times, um, well, no, I could pay this guy this much to do this job, and that may be, but can you find that guy?
That's going to be and how long will you keep them?
It's like Clark County, Nevada, right now in the Vegas Valley, trying to argue about water prices when there isn't water, or
Right.
or the Southwest in general. They're fighting over water that doesn't exist.
It's not even there.
So
Yeah.
we're making an argument for labor that doesn't exist, and I don't know that we can really win that argument much longer because it's
And
it's
I
just gotten
honestly
tougher
think
and
that's
tougher.
only going to get worse. I don't
Yeah,
think that's going to
yeah.
get better in the next 10 years. I mean, especially, salaries are up and, golf courses still have that pinch and this is
Yep.
still an ROI. I mean, that's
Hope
the bottom line. It's a business decision and it makes,
Hopefully I didn't offend anybody with that, but I think it's a moot point. If you don't have the labor, you can't say, well, I could pay somebody to do
yeah,
that.
exactly.
That's a hard one for me to swallow.
At least here in the Northeast, it's not uncommon anymore. I mean, I remember a few years ago, you'd walk in and there's a guy with a couple robots. I'm like, oh, how cool! Let me see them. And
Yeah.
now, you walk in and you trip over a couple and you just don't even talk about it because it's becoming much more common.
Yep.
And we saw more robotic mowers at the show. I mean, there was two or three companies that I never heard of that relatively new in that sector. So yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, if you're going to these shows, that should be one thing that you really keep an eye out for. You
How
know,
many how many airports have you been in the last 2 weeks?
more than you can count.
How many have robotic janitorial stuff
Yeah,
going on?
exactly. That you kind
All
of
of them.
walk into. Yeah, every one of
I
them.
I noticed I was in 4 airports in the
Yeah.
last week, and I noticed all four of them have
It's
have
funny.
these little mop systems going around
Yeah.
robotically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, I mean, I was on a college campus not too long ago, and they had a robot that was delivering food to the dorms.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, really? I mean,
right.
First of all, go walk around a little bit, kid. But
Yeah, that's a whole different subject.
let's talk a little bit about our friend Dave Wilbur's new project, and we had him on the podcast not too long ago, but that was relatively new. I mean, turf rad,
Yeah,
and that's a moisture management thing, and and we broached this a little bit earlier. I mean, when we're talking soil biology. It's imperative if we're going to keep biology doing what we wanted to do, that there's moisture in that
right,
soil.
right.
And what is it, 7,000 shots a second?
Per minute.
10,000 per minute. So
Yeah,
10,000 shots, of a fairway, while you're running down a fairway. So
yeah.
you really can map out that. And I don't know, I just think this kind of technology really feeds into what we've been talking about, and anything that you can. I mean, moisture, you got to remember, is much more than just, keeping the roots going. It's also keeping biology going. And if you can't,
Yep.
you don't have that. And, I mean, you
Well,
probably know more about the turf rad than I do. So,
and in my territory, moisture also costs money.
mm, oh
And
boy.
and the flip side of that, I had dinner with Dave and our friend Lance Lauer from the Country Club at Castle Pines, and Lance had this technology. He's had it for the last year and a half, even before Dave came on board.
Oh, I didn't know
A-
that.
and they're practically neighbors, so he's extended the invitation for Dave to come down and kind of see how they're using it. But the holy grail for any of this technology, I don't care whether it's handheld moisture meters or a turf rad system, is integration with the irrigation system. And Toro was the first to recognize
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Rainbird will find some way to utilize it as well. But what Lance was telling me absolutely blew my mind. So he got in kind of the behind the curtain in the land of Oz with Toro to see what's on the horizon with this turf rad technology. And he said there may be, with some of the stuff that research has brought us as far as dry down cycles and being able to build predictive models based on not only weather data but ET and all these other factors that can be compiled into a data set. He said there may be a night where if his ET number lands at 0.13, or his moisture is at 13, I guess it was. I'll have to have him kind of explain this in a conversation. But if that number ends up at 13, and he knows that at the last data collection, which might have been that morning, we were at 16 or 17, whatever the number is, doesn't really
Right.
matter.
Yeah. It's all relative.
That information goes automatically now into the Toro system, and he said there could be a night where, based on my input of, hey, 13's our threshold, there may be four heads that run on the entire golf course to meet that, based on all the data collection that's happened, linked to the sprinkler spacing and pattern.
Oh,
So
man.
and the next night, maybe 1,000 have to run to
Right.
replenish what was lost. But he said it's going to be that much control. And, he pays a little bit for water, not a ton, but I've got clients in the Vegas Valley that are staring $2 million annual water
Oh, it's
budgets
over
now.
2 million now. Jeez.
Yeah, they're about to see another 50% increase. So you can't tell me that somebody couldn't benefit from
So go
integrating
back.
this.
So the turf rad is now hooked into the system. Is that what you were
They've
saying?
Toro has come to an
With
agreement,
turf
and
rad?
you'd have to
Yeah.
have Dave explain it because it got a little convoluted during the
And that's
during the
relatively
show,
new,
but
though, right? Because we
it's
had him
brand
on
new.
what
Yeah,
we had him on early January, and
yep.
I think he was hinting that they were working.
It was in the works, but he couldn't talk about it
Right,
yet. But
right,
yeah, and
exactly.
and everybody got ahead of their skis a little bit during the show because we always want to launch something new. But Lance has seen that tech, and that integration is so critical because you know right now superintendents have 10 different dashboards up. They've got their labor tracker, they've got
Yeah.
their equipment tracker, their budget tracker, and nobody's collating all this information. And so you can tell by my voice, I'm pretty excited about having several of these pieces integrated into one management software, and that happens to be on the Toro system. But that to me, I used that term earlier. That is the holy grail, is to be able to collate all this stuff into one
Yeah.
dashboard that says, hey, you know what? My goal number is 13 today. I'm at 17. Nothing needs to run.
Yeah.
Or, the wind hit the south side of the golf course, but the protected areas weren't. So I only need to run 200 heads out of 1,500 or whatever it might be. That's amazing to me. And
Yeah.
Lance was as blown away as I was by seeing some of that stuff foreshadowed for this year.
Real quickly, in case somebody didn't listen to our podcast with Dave, explain turf rat. What's the technology?
It's an equipment mounted, and I use that term because traditionally I think it's been used to map fairways
Yeah.
via mounting the equipment on a fairway cutting unit. A lot of guys, Lance included, use it on a golf cart or on a utility cart because he wants to capture the data on the greens as well, so he can feel comfortable running it across the greens. That's coming too, where they've got both triplex mount, but also like a walking greens mower mount, a little bit different collection unit. The thing is though, and I think the thing that we lose track of, greens, as important as they are, greens are relatively easy to control. It's a man-made profile. It's only 3 acres, and we focus more on those 3 acres than anywhere on the golf course. But if you're looking at savings on water,
where all the water goes,
all the acreage, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where turf rat, I think, is really poised to make a big impact in the industry. Is that they can collect really thousands of data points on. Right. I'm sure we'll end up in roughs as well. And especially if it's a utility cart mount, they could take it anywhere. So, greens are nice to have, but we also have pretty good control, and we already have systems in place to measure those areas pretty quickly and efficiently. So, to me, that's where the value in this system
So you
is.
must be a little frustrated as a former superintendent. You never had robotic mowers. You never had these kind of technologies, and they're coming fast and furious now.
And right or wrong, I was always kind of an early adopter, so you can bet your bottom dollar I would have.
Oh, you would have been one of the first. Well, certainly turf rat, you would have been right on there. And
when Jerry and Jamie showed it to me when they were first bringing it to the States, I said, I might have said holy something, and
I think there was an expletive there.
Yeah, do you know what you guys have got here? And they did, but they didn't, and there was still a lot of work to be done as far as even building a software program that could give the data to us in a map formation. But it still didn't have that integration with irrigation until recently.
That's just, the integration is what's going to make this thing incredible. Think about it.
Absolutely.
If you could just turn on 2 heads, 4 heads, 6 heads, on a given evening, first of all, it's funny. I'm working with a young guy who just took a new job, and he's going to this property. And, I said, so what do you think? Is it in good shape? He goes, no, it's in horrible shape. The worst thing is these guys continually overwater. It's saturated. And he said, even in his interviews, the members would say, the place is always wet. Turn the damn water off.
Pretty easy fix.
And, it's
you can be a hero.
It's agronomy 101. And it's, and I've said this 1,000 times, but, when I was at Rutgers, and I remember sitting around, and having coffee with some of the instructors, the hardest thing to teach a young superintendent, an upcoming superintendent, is how to water. And you've heard me on many interviews here on the podcast, I would ask a superintendent, how do you teach a young guy how to water? It's an art. It's not,
it is.
It's truly an art. But now with all the technology, it's getting easier. And I say this all the time: superintendents are incredibly intuitive. The tools that we bring to the table, like a soil test or like a moisture meter or the RAD system, these just enhance the intuition that you guys have always had. And just when you can confirm your intuition with data, it just makes that so much easier. And it just it's going to bring things to the table, which is pretty cool.
Before I switched to a Leatherman on my belt, I always carried a Swiss Army knife, and
there's technology.
You'd have to be over probably 40 or 50 to remember this, but your grandmother always checked the cake with a toothpick, right?
Well,
and
exactly.
If the toothpick came out with batter on it, it wasn't done.
It wasn't.
Well, the same thing for me. I would stick that knife handle in, and I could feel the resistance, and that would say, okay, there's still moisture in it. If it was smooth and warm, it was dry as a popcorn fart.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
but to me, that whether it's TDR or Pogo, any of the early,
Yeah.
reliable moisture meters that launched into the market, that now put a number to my feel that was
Right.
really difficult to teach. But I could take that Swiss Army knife, put it in the ground, get my feel,
Yeah.
and then convert it to a number. It makes that feel very, very easy to teach
Yeah.
compared to the feel.
Although, do you think some guys lean on that number too much sometimes?
No, not so much that. I think what they do is what's the term, paralysis by analysis. I,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
kind of what I
there's
was getting at. Over
there's so
analytical.
much data collection
I know.
available between clip volume and moisture meter readings and all this stuff that, not only have we probably lost that feel component of the job, but there's a lot of data flying at guys, and they're still trying to make sure they're coming
Yeah.
in under budget. So I don't know, that's and again, that goes back to the company that figures out how to collate all of this data collection into one source
Yeah.
wins.
I think I've said this too on the podcast, but one of the things that really hit me at the GIS was a couple superintendents talking about. I think one of our next hires is going to be the computer guy, the
Yep,
tech
an IT guy.
who's going to manage the compute. The
Yeah.
all that data you just talked about. Make sure that the robots are doing their thing and working properly, but also taking all the data and bringing it in and making sense of it all so that everybody can still do their thing.
Yeah.
Let me you just put together a turf talk that I think we're going to run this week that talked about one of the things that Lance was doing on his property.
Right.
Talk a little bit about. I think that's fascinating. When you showed me that, I'm like, that's brilliant. I mean, and this is all his doing, right? Talk about him.
I think so. I have not seen it anywhere else. Well, the front range of Colorado sees a lot of snow and then melt off, snow and melt off. It's a cyclical winter cycle
Yeah.
that they deal with, and so you've got to keep drain lines open. And at first, your first impression of the picture was, well, is that so we can find the drains? And that's my first thought too.
That's exactly what I thought.
Yeah, but what it is just about a 2 or 3 foot piece of drain tile. It was about 2 feet tall, and the drain tile, being black, can grab a little bit of the sun's energy, because the thing that's drawing a lot of people to the Denver area is that there's 300 plus days of sunshine a year.
Yeah.
So even one of the worst sunburns I've ever had was when I was at Castle Pines for my internship in March in the snow, and I just got
It's very
completely
reflective.
fried.
Yeah.
But so he's utilizing the passive solar heating of the sun's energy to keep those catch basins open, because he's constantly got water flowing across that golf course, whether there's a foot of snow on the ground or whether it's open. And I just thought that was a super easy. I mean, there's some labor involved on the front end, just fitting each drain catch basin with these things, but it was a way to keep those things flowing during the winter months that was pretty critical, because not only can you get ice damage, but it keeps his guys off the golf course too.
Now, the pictures you showed, I mean, there was very little snow. I mean, he has them just.
Yeah.
I assume he's closed during the winter.
He's closed. He'll be pulling those off in the next
as soon
week
as
or
he
two,
opens, I'm sure. But
yeah,
but they're about 2 feet tall and they're on every drain.
I think so. I think
And
so. So there's a lot of work involved.
Yeah, I can imagine. It looked like it. I mean, you show it in the turf talk, and I would encourage everybody to watch this. But it was really not. It wasn't. I mean, again, my first impression was just to see where the drains are and the snow level. But it really was allowing the drains to stay open.
Yeah.
Not freezing over like they would if there was just a solid sheet of ice on them.
I sat
think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I sat in a class years ago about ice damage, and it was kind of a roundtable with a bunch of Canadian superintendents who obviously know how to deal with ice damage. And, especially the interior of Canada. And one of the thoughts that really made sense to me, a superintendent would drive a piece of rebar, pretty heavy duty, like 3/4 inch rebar, into or next to a drain, so that he could go out with a torch and kind of heat that thing up and allow it
Oh,
to melt
really?
some of the
Oh, that's
water.
pretty clever.
Which, anytime you can utilize a torch for something like that,
It's always
it's
fun.
manly and it's
Yeah,
fun.
it's like that.
But
Exactly. It's
but Lance's solution I thought was so much better just because it's passive, it's there, you don't have to intervene with
right.
it at all. It's always working. So
Probably not as much fun though. The torch would be fun.
the torch is way more
Yeah,
fun, but
that's
yeah,
gotta be a lot of fun just spinning around,
right.
lighting things up, and all
Yeah.
that. Anything
So
else at the show that jumped out at you? I mean, like you said, we saw a lot of technology, and even at the GIS, and I've said this for all the years I've been doing this. Every year you see new carbon companies,
yeah,
guys selling something.
yeah,
But you're right. I mean, and I've been saying this at all these academies and all on the podcast a lot. Our industry has changed from a fertility standpoint. You're going to see carbon in everything forever. For a good reason because
yeah.
it feeds microbes and microbes are even though we know less than 5% of these guys, we know what they do and we know how they work. And, we're not the only ones saying it anymore. I mean, for 20 some years, we were called every name in the book and just a bunch of heretics. But, when you see the biggest fertilizer company coming out with a humic acid product, that the industry is changing. So,
Well, it makes even the simplest of fertility inputs work better. I mean, you think
yeah.
about coating a urea prill with a humic substance, it's going to make it work better. It's going to make it
And
last
that's why they're
longer.
doing it. Yeah, that's why
Yeah,
they're doing it. And
exactly.
and the
So,
same thing with the liquid guys. I mean, it makes their liquid
right,
fertilizers more available. I mean, it
right,
mobilize. I mean, you bring microbes. It's carbon to nitrogen. It's the most basic agronomic thing in the world. We didn't make it up. It's in every book. We half of us slept through it in college, but
right.
if you understand the concept, and again, then you tie it into the 20-minute microbe. You got to have, and that's why we've been so adamant about diversity of carbon. It's not just a single element, or I've told this story 100 times, but when we made C3, I had a kelp product that was a linear product, and Jerry walked in the office and pummeled me. I mean, pummeled me
Right.
and said, we don't sell linear products. And I'm like, I get that, but I'm just trying to do something cheap and easy on a fairway. And he was still adamant, we don't do that. And I said, all right, well, then do something for me. And he took an EarthWorks notepad and scratched out what is still to this day the core of the C3 formula, which
Yeah.
is our biggest selling product and one of the most powerful carbon sources, in the industry. But, one of the things that, again, I get a lot of guys that are confused as to, what do these do and, how do you do them? And one of the things that bugs me more than anything is that most of the guys that are playing in the carbon box are still in the plant box. They're not in the soil box. And that's the thing that bugs me more than anything. And until we start to see that change, that
Right.
these guys that are out there marketing these products, they're marketing it to the plant and they have very little to do with, well, they have little to do with the plant. They have everything to do with feeding that 20-minute bacteria. So, I
Hmm.
mean, you see guys that have kelp on their label, but the jug costs $70. Kelp is the most single product that we buy, most expensive
Yeah.
raw material that we buy, and to have a $70 jug that says it's got all this kelp in it, it's most likely not.
Yeah.
And that's where the industry needs to get wiser, and that's kind of what we've been preaching. And I mean, like I said, I've done 15 academies. I'm exhausted. This is the first week I've been home. We were on our Monday morning meeting, and Jack Higgins was actually in the diner that I spend my Mondays in at Newark Airport. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly where you're sitting. And oh, there's Renee, the waitress
Right.
who always says hi to me, Joel.
Order the
But
eggs, Benny.
yeah, exactly. The proper breakfast. But yeah, it's I mean, it's still going to be confusing. We'll keep talking about it, and we'll keep trying to help people understand and discover where this is going. But you'd be surprised. We just blew through an hour just hanging out and talking, and
I'm
it's
not
funny.
surprised.
Our marketing guy, Mike Small, has suggested that between all of us, we have he sat and listened to us, and we'll sit there and talk turf. And he's not a turf guy, but he goes, "You guys sit around just talking." And some of the things you talk about would be just great, stuff to have on the
Yeah.
podcast. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to do a
Here
little.
we go.
Yeah, I think we're going to do a
First
little
installment.
There you go. We'll do a little bit more back and forth between just us. I mean, he wants us to kind of put a microphone. One of the funniest things he said, when I travel around, I would get in the car with one of you guys,
Yeah.
and he goes, "That's when you need to record because what you're talking about in the car." Short of me cursing at the guy in front of me.
Yeah, it would be half beeped out though. We don't want to do that.
We'd have to do some editing, but I'm getting much better in my old age. I'm not, not as angry a man as I used to be. But anyway, thank you so much. I think this is good. Like I said, I would really encourage everybody to take a look at Kevin's Turf Talk with Lance Lauer, and it's just one of those little tricks, for anybody that's got snow on their property northeast or in the mountains. I mean, those are the kind of things that I really get excited about because it's so simple. And and when you showed it to me, I'm like, well, that I mean, I quite honestly, I don't think I even fully appreciated it, but it made perfect sense. And where does that idea come from? I mean, it's just where did it come from?
Not to take credit away from Lance, but I'm sure it was somebody on the staff that just thinks about things. I always told my crew that, hey, you can't sit on a mower for 5 hours and not come up with a better way to mow. Like, you got to tell me these things, right? I want to leave you with one thought. And by the way, on the drain thing, there's no reason you need to take it to the level that he did. If you've got problem areas, that's where you start with it.
Right. That makes sense.
Maybe you only need to do a dozen drains that really give you issues. But I just thought it was a good enough idea, and I told him I was
brilliant. It's still brilliant.
But I do want to leave you with the thought about efficacy and increasing the the value of our fertility inputs. Airification is happening right now in a lot of areas, and getting an opportunity to put something in those holes that's going to last through the season, but make everything work better.
Yeah.
And it's the old BASF commercial where we don't make the product, we make it better. I mean, we don't necessarily provide all the fertility during the course of the year, but if you get us in the ground on the front and the back end, we'll make everything work better. And
it's the single, I think, most powerful thing that we can offer a superintendent to be successful. It makes me think back, and I don't know, you weren't here when I did this. I've always had this certain level of pride in some of the marketing materials that we've put out. I did put out one thing that may not have been the most appropriate, and it was an ad that basically said, "Don't waste good holes." And after we published it, I got an awful lot of feedback from guys.
I agree.
That thought it was rather funny. You might have been one of them. But the point was, if you got a hole open, I mean, it's funny. I reviewed a handful of programs this week for superintendents that are moving on to other properties, and I would look at this. And they had holes open, and all they were putting in there was synthetic fertilizers.
Right.
I mean, when you have a hole open, that's soil. That's when you put down a renovate. That's definitely when you put down mycorrhizae. That's when you put down a physical amendment like E. coli or zeolite. And these things heal over those holes very quickly and build roots and just build longevity. And it's the same basic principle as what we're doing in construction. But yeah, airification season is here. Renovate Myco, bag per green, simplest thing in the world. Open up the holes, put it down, sand over it, drag it all around, and you're going to heal over very quickly. I tell this story often that, I go to a local Muni course, and they would offer hamburgers and beers to all the old guys when they airified. And we came in, it was one of my former students, and we came in and put down Renovate and Myco. They healed over in days. The hamburgers went away, and the old guys were really pissed at me. But that's a good thing. So, yeah, airification season is here. Renovate Myco, bag per green, simplest thing you can ever do. And I guarantee you, if you've never done it, you will see phenomenal results. So, with that, we will move on to next week's podcast. I'm not sure exactly how. We got a couple things coming up that are going to be pretty cool. But thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. I appreciate you and all the support you give us. I mean, it's invaluable to have somebody with your years of experience on this team. So it's always been fun. And thank God I answered the phone on Labor Day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks. That was good.
Absolutely. And with that, folks, please subscribe if you haven't already. We will get out as much information as we can to you, and we'll be back next week with another EarthWorks podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.